Welcome back to the Changemaker Podcast. I'm your host, Deke Copenhaver. Today, my guest is Ariana Pekary. Ariana is an award-winning journalist working to improve the landscape of TV news to make it more informed and less divisive. How about that? She's also a yoga instructor and host of the podcast, Our World Inside. Ariana, I am so psyched to have you today.
Welcome to the Changemaker Podcast, hosted by Deke Copenhaver. Deke is the author of The Changemaker, a Forbes publishing book that has reached #1 on Amazon on multiple occasions and in multiple categories like management skills and total quality management. During this podcast, Deke interviews exceptional change-making leaders. Deke currently operates Copenhaver Consulting, where he helps local governments and other public organizations maximize their potential. He's also a sought-after public speaker. We hope that the Changemaker has an impact on you today and that you find takeaways that make you a better leader in your life. Now, here's Deke.
Oh, I'm so excited to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
Well, good deal. Well, just before we came on, we were talking about, and I think my listeners, viewers know that I'm dealing with esophageal cancer. But so I've had a positive attitude throughout. So I just got back from MD Anderson. They did an endoscopy after 5.5 weeks of intense chemo and radiation treatment. They could find no cancer in my esophagus, in my lymph nodes, anywhere. But we've talked about just in life to have that positive outlook, how beneficial it is. But I want to talk about what you did in your previous life. I mean, being a part of the media, and I'd love for you to talk about that with our viewers and listeners, because that's not got to be the most positive environment at times, I would think.
No. Yes. No, it's, working in TV news, I was at MSNBC, a producer there for 7 years, and I'd worked in public radio before that for, how many years? 12 years before that. So altogether, I have about 20 years experience in news. And it was tough being at MSNBC. It was a struggle for me from the get-go. I went there to start something new. It was a new program. That was a different format altogether, and I was excited about that. That imploded pretty quickly, and then I kind of got stuck in the wheel of doing a normal, primetime cable news program, and struggled with that for a bit. And then I resigned in 2020. Kind of in protest of the industry, and it's easy to hate on the people in cable news, but it's really the structure of the entire industry. So that's really my focus. And even after, I think I faced probably more negativity after I resigned than even before. And people, there's so much negativity that anything can be done to change it. And I understand why they say that, and it is extremely difficult to change. But I have kind of learned to take a longer view outlook on things, and I still am hopeful that we can get to a better place.
Well, it's interesting. So I had a 3-hour-a-day call-in radio show on conservative talk radio here in Augusta, which was the furthest thing from conservative talk radio. I had live local music Wednesdays. I had Al Sharpton as a guest and Chef Jose Andres, along with our governor, Brian Kemp, who's a Republican. But so they canceled Glenn Beck and replaced him with me. But the station manager or the marketing director told my assistant that my show made more money for the station than Glenn Beck's ever did, but they canceled me and replaced me with Glenn Beck. So it's like, even if you can show a model that's, more profitable than what we've already got, it just seems like the media, and I'd love to get your take on this, it's kind of like, well, this is the tried and true model, but we've always done it this way.
Yeah. I worked in public radio for 12 years, and that's a nonprofit entity there. It's the funding comes from a variety of places. And the bottom line, though, is that we never paid attention to how the program's rated. We didn't get those numbers. We may have gotten them once or twice, but they were like, big numbers for like how many listeners we had for the year or something like that. But not that inter-day, at MSNBC, we got the ratings by hour and by quarter hour. And there are sometimes, they break it down even more so than that. And they really rely on those numbers for advertising funding and what they can charge, to bundle the programs and so forth. And I can tell you that it makes an enormous difference in the decision-making process. The people at MSNBC, I think, felt like largely had a similar outlook to the people who I worked with in public radio. Similar training, journalism schools background, but also kind of the sensitivities were largely the same. And I, coming from the public radio, I was constantly pitching the same types of stories and ideas and guests. And they would like them, but by the time we went to air at night, the show I worked on predominantly was from 10 to 11. By the time we got to air, my ideas usually had been hacked, had been cut because they weren't gonna, they weren't interested, they weren't fiery enough, maybe. They would always, go for the most colorful speaker or the topic that is the most, gonna get people riled up the most, more so than something that is informative. And that was all driven by the ratings. They were very blunt about it. And so from my perspective, I really think that if you're trying to produce a news product, you do have to take the financial incentives out of that. And the question is, how do you do that?
Yes.
You have to have like certain kind of funding where the people are really committed to not seeking $1 billion return on their profit every year. And that's kind of what the cable news companies have been making. They've been making billions in profit. That's above their costs. And I think that you have to have a way that you're not seeking. I think you can break even, but you're not looking to make all this extra cash for your stockholders.
Let me ask you this though, because I've always wondered about this. When you talk about ratings, how accurate, because I think about, I have a political background, polling, in recent presidential races, polling has been so far off, but ratings are basically sort of generated in the same way through, calling and polling listeners or viewers. So I'm just curious, because people say, oh, well, if it bleeds, it leads. This is what the public's buying. It's what they're consuming, which is why we're making billions of dollars. But how accurate do you really think those ratings are these days?
Yeah, I did a significant amount of research on that very topic. And the ratings are not accurate. So it's just it's like bad decisions based on bad data. And it's like you're ending up with even worse. And what's happening is, Nielsen's will say that they're, in-home representation, the numbers that they get are as good as you can get. And that might be true, but with technology evolving like it is, their mechanism for tracking all the viewers, people on their phones or people in bars or people who are streaming. There's not a good way to track. I think that in the last year they have made some caught up and made some progress on that front. But I know when I was at MSNBC that the numbers were definitely not accurate to reflect demographics and age and.
Well, it's interesting. Both you and I are movement partners with Starts With Us, which I talk a lot about. Starts With Us here, which I think is a great organization. There are 500 plus bridging organizations in the U.S. now. They don't get a lot of press coverage, frankly. But I did an interview with an anchorman here in Augusta, a friend of mine. He's the anchorman for our local CBS affiliate. But he said during the interview, he said, I kind of get tired of the negativity. I wish we in the media could do more. But, Starts With Us is about personal responsibility. I said, but the consumers have a role to play as well. Because if we're consuming what you're feeding us, if negativity and controversy gets clicks, we're doing it to ourselves at the same time.
Yeah, I firmly believe that. And so I believe that any interview like this where I can raise awareness on this topic is important. That's one of the things that I'm dedicated to doing. Anybody who asks, we'll talk about this issue. But it is that And it's, how do you change cable news? Yeah, you turn off the channel and stop giving them, reward for bad content or bad product. And one, the product is damaging. It's very clear how the polarizing effect that cable news has on our country. It has an outsized influence. The audience is actually not very big, but the influence it has, it spreads pretty quickly. And so we need that awareness. So we need, consumers, the people who are sitting in front of their TVs need to understand, like, you just need to turn it off. The problem is, turn it off for what? Like, there aren't many TV news options out there. There's certainly no other real, 24-hour news network. I mean, there are a few others that have started up, but they don't have a big audience. I don't think that they'll succeed because they're using the cable news model. I think we need something that is really informative and to do news well, you need research, you need real journalists, you need good storytellers to make that, to create the visuals, to create interesting dynamic conversations. And so many of these cable programs are really, they just want instant gratification on an hour by hour basis. And that's what their model is. And so it's cheap and it's easy. And so that's why people stick to it like they do.
Yes.
It gets them, it does create some of an audience that they are able to make a financial, return on, but it's fairly cheap. And to do something well, you do need more investment. And so that's the other catch here. And so that's why at this point that doesn't exist. I think we could easily build something in a country like the United States. We have so much talent and goodwill and smart people and the technology and the ability to do really phenomenal work. We've got the resources. We can do this. There's no reason why we should not have the preeminent TV news service in the world, really. And we don't, you can't call what we have here a role model for the world, because it's not up to par. And so when you tell people to tune out, it's like, what do I tune out to? It's probably gonna, it takes me to read in properly every day. It's easily 5 hours. Because I feel like I have to triangulate. Like, if I read something here, even though it's a trusted news source, they might not have covered something that I like, a part of that story that I feel like I need to know. So then I start searching around and looking for other sources. And that the average person doesn't have that time. So we really do need something new that does that for people. That is good, that is well informed, and that is not driven by financial incentives, because that's always going to drive producers to the lowest common denominator. What's the easiest? The news industry is difficult. I'm sorry, I keep going on.
No.
Hard. It takes it's exhausting doing this day in and day out. The 24-hour news cycle. It takes a lot, and I feel sorry for my colleagues who I used to work with. It's a grind. It's really hard work, and so that's why I know. It's you're just going to go to the easiest material. You're not going to try to, put in any extra effort into something interesting if it is probably not going to make it to air, because if your breaking news model prohibits that, you might spend money and time on something that's not really going to make it to air, and it's not going to rate well, or if that's the metric that you're using as a is something successful. If you're going to look at how it rates as a way to determine that, then that's when that stuff starts getting cut. And so we just need a different model. We can do it. It is very possible. And I know that there are enough people in the United States with deep pockets, and the people with the skills to make this happen. But it's just going to take time, I think, convincing the right people to come together and make that happen.
I think having been in public radio, the knock is, And I will say, I think podcasts are one way to get around that because they're not expensive to make. You can do long form where you actually educate people. They're not as profit driven as these days, but it's, to me, there's a knock on public radio. It's boring. It's drab. But Tom Fishman, the CEO of Starts With Us, and I've had discussions. I'm like, you can be edgy and irreverent without being offensive.
Absolutely.
I do it all the time.
Absolutely.
Monty Python, look at British TV.
Yes. And that I do look at the BBC as more of a model. I don't think, I think we could probably improve on that as well. And I think, I love NPR, and I think, there's a lot that I love about it. There's a lot that I criticize about public radio as well. And so I think that can also be improved upon. I think that, there are a couple of things here. One, I think that, for example, public radio, NPR could be much more diverse.
Yeah.
And when I say that, I mean that it kind of ends up sounding the same. Yeah, the parody on SNL that they do of NPR, that's kind of what all of NPR sounds like. Yeah. It's someone talking with very docile tones into a microphone, and it's smart, but that doesn't connect. That doesn't resonate for so many people in this country, and that could be people in cities. It could be people out in farmland. Yeah, I'm from Central. Grew up on a farm in Virginia, and I know that NPR just doesn't appeal. But when I would lived with my mother for a while after I resigned, we'd get in the car, and it's not a habit for her to listen to NPR, and it is for me. So when I get in the car, we'd go somewhere, and she'd be like, I really like this. She'd be listening to one of their random, Saturday programs. She was like, this is really good. I'm like, yes, I know. But there isn't that culture. They don't have an advertising budget. There are lots of things that are going against them. But in general, I feel like the NPR could be much more relevant and sound like the country more than it does now. And that can be through humor. There's so many other things you can do. And that's one of my things. I think all humans are inherently curious. Yeah. And so if they're learning something new, even if it's something that you didn't know that you were going to be interested in, if it's something new and you didn't know this 5 minutes ago, but someone is teaching you something, you're going to keep listening, because that's that's encoded in your DNA. Like that, we need that for survival. That curiosity, that's information that is new that I didn't know that we are inherently curious, and that type of programming, it can be, again, it takes good storytellers, and it takes people, it doesn't necessarily have to be a left-right thing. It can just be just appealing to people's sense of wonder about the world, and getting out and seeing something new and different. And, again, it goes back to, the audience has to be open to that and break out of their habits, turn off cable news, for example. Get off their phones for a minute, maybe. And it is hard to reach those people. Oh, the other thing I was going to say is that I think the podcasts are wonderful. I'm putting together a podcast of my own right now. And I love the medium, and I think radio is unique, and I think it is special above and beyond television, which relies on visuals. Radio really engages the imagination. The human voice, you really connect with the voice in radio. But people need, I think, a brand that they trust. And so I think that there's some value in having a network that has the resources. So there are lots of one-offs. And the point is, my mom doesn't know where to go to get the news. She sits down and turns on cable TV. Because that's what's available to her, and that's what she knows. She doesn't know if she can trust any of these one-off podcasts. Yeah. Which there are many, many good ones, and there are many, many bad ones. And so I empathize with people who don't know where to start on that field. Yeah. So I think there needs to be some way to curate, if nothing else, and put, somehow brand all of this material that is good and worthwhile, so that helps the general audience a little bit more.
It's interesting to me. So I grew up wanting to be a journalist. I actually, growing up, I wanted to write for Rolling Stone. I wanted, still, I'm 55, still within the realm of possibility. But I also loved Walter Cronkite. So for those of our younger generation that may not know Walter Cronkite, anchorman, CBS Evening News, the most trusted man in America. But he said at one point, the role of a journalist is to hold up a mirror to what's going on in society and let people make their own decisions. Well, we released, starts with us, we released some information, a report that we did in conjunction with George Washington University back a couple months ago that showed that in leading up to the midterm elections, that the hyper-partisan members of Congress on both sides got 4 times the coverage than people doing work in bipartisan fashion. So what was interesting to me, and I want to get your take on this, so the mainstream media did pick up on that report. And I think The View covered it twice, but I got a sense from The View almost, what they did is like, oh my gosh, we're really a part of this? Are we really doing this? So it was almost that holding up a mirror, not to say we're going to pin everything on the media or on politicians, but it's on all of us. But yeah, media, you are contributing to the problem.
Oh, yeah. And that's, I will also say, I think I was able to observe these problems in commercial TV news, being a cable news network, MSNBC. I was able to see the differences between how they do things and how a newsroom in public radio is run, because I'd been there before. I'd spent a lot of time in those editorial meetings. I knew what was acceptable in terms of deciding a segment and what was not acceptable, or the differences. I won't say, even taking away judgment. It was a very different process. And the people who come up in MSNBC, very, very few had lived in the public radio world. So they came up through the system. They either were, came up from a local station or, the local, NBC affiliate, for example, or they started off as a page or an intern at NBC. Yes. They all kind of came up through that system, and that's what they know. Like that's how all of them are evaluated, is how well something rated. And they brag about, you see how, they'll say we were the top rated network, last week, or during they're constantly bragging about the ratings, and that's how that is built in, that is like internalized. And so that's all they know in terms of how to develop, how to create content. And they don't know what they don't know. So they don't know, and this idea that, that I say they're kind of like, a fish in water. The fish doesn't know that they're surrounded by water because it's always been there, right? And so it takes someone who understands both worlds to explain, there are other ways to do this. And yes, you are part of the problem, unfortunately. Yeah,
but if you're socialized in a certain way, that's going to be your worldview. But one of the things that I tried to do in 9 years in office was I realized, the reporters generally, Augusta's mid-market, people looking to make their way up to a bigger market, they were 20-something years old. And as far as understanding government and millage rates and all the things that are boring as hell, to be honest, I took it upon myself to really try to educate them and to establish strong working relationships with them. So now 15 years beyond that, a lot of these young reporters are still great friends of mine, but they remembered when I took the time, rather than going, hey, the press is the enemy, to take them under your wing and say, look, you can report on what you want, but let me explain to you how this works. And as you say, there's a natural curiosity. And I think that was my role. And I felt like it was my responsibility as an elected leader to, rather than just bitch and complain about how bad the media is, to actually try to help them.
Well, bless you for doing that. We need more people like you. And I think we all need to remind ourselves of that. I need to remind myself of that. It's easy to get to a point where you feel like you know everything.
Yes.
And you can't be taught anything. And I definitely, we could all use a little bit of humility
Yes.
to that end. And part of the problem is the world expects us all to have the answers all the time. So it creates, you have to be somewhat vulnerable to say, I don't know something, or maybe I could be better at something. But the way that our world is, and the way that everything is so competitive, if you admit that you might not know XYZ, or you could do more on that front, that's admitting a fault that what people see as a fault.
Yeah.
But to me, that's a part of the natural process of growth. You have to be aware that, like, I could do better, or I might not know everything, but it's just, there are all these societal pressures, and it could come from the workplace or family or school, what have you. You have to be the best at everything. There is some awareness of, I could be doing, it better, and I'm not afraid to admit that I don't know everything. That's such a big thing for all of us to remember every day, and it's hard. It's hard because we're constantly bombarded like these waves of, come crashing at us, telling you to be the best, and to never admit a weakness. And I think it's important that we all start to kind of remind ourselves of it's okay to be that way. It's okay.
Oh yeah, well, I mean, it starts with us as a movement based to overcome extreme polarization, based on the 3 C's. Personal accountability. If we can treat each other with curiosity, compassion, and the courage to have the difficult conversations, I'm like, it takes much more strength of character to have the courage to go, hey man, I don't know the answer to that. I'd like to figure it out with you. But I'll give you a prime example. 2 summers ago, when I started this podcast, I had an intern, 20-year-old, her name's Molly Eddings, 20-year-old student at the University of Georgia. She's since graduated, set the world on fire, brilliant young lady. But after the first podcast that we did, I was like, Molly, what'd you think of that? And she's like, yeah. I'm like, you didn't think it was great? She's like, no. So I was like, well, what can we do to make it better? And so she gave me all these pointers. I'm like, so a 20-year-old student from the University of Georgia, and I'm a 50-something-year-old dude, but she listened to podcasts more than me, and she helped make this podcast what it is today. But if I'd have gone, oh, well, hell, she's a 20-something-year-old student at the University of Georgia, how could she know any more than me? I'm like, she just did. And there's no, dishonor, or there's no, for me to admit that. I think vulnerability is actually really cool.
Yeah. I love that story. That is, we need more of that. And I need more of that. It's, every interpersonal relationship you have, there's, that dynamic can exist, that you don't want to cede any ground to the other person because you feel like you're going to, fall behind them. But I love that story. And I recently heard, it was another podcast. They started to have a guest on, and it was someone they'd been very excited to have on as a guest, and they were connecting beforehand. And the guest's, I think, husband was helping set up the video monitor, and they were testing it, and they were having some problems with the intern. It wasn't the intern's problem. There was just a technical glitch. Something wasn't working well. But the man ended up coming at I don't know if it was an intern or production assistant, but one of the kind of more entry level people there, and was pretty nasty. It sounds like the man was not nice to her.
Yeah.
And that immediately, like that exchange got back to the hosts of this podcast, and they said, well, we're not going to do an interview with people like that. And they canceled it right there. And instead, they didn't have a guest. And instead, they spent that time. They didn't name the person, so I have no idea who these people were. But I love how in the moment they were, and made a snap decision. And they didn't. It was someone, obviously, notable, and it was probably a name that they were excited about to get on. But they put their values first,
Yes.
and they recognized that, and they didn't let that get away from them. And again, it's that presence of mind, always kind of paying attention. Don't do things mindlessly, and out of habit. And we all do it. We all do it.
Yeah.
But this constant reminder of like being in the moment and reacting and responding, not just reacting like knee-jerk reactions, but responding with some, a level of intelligence, and awareness.
Well, so for 9 years in office, and I did this, but I come from a point of, I'm going to treat everybody with dignity and respect, but I expect you to do the same thing for me. So I would have constituents call in just going nuts. And I'm like, look, I'm going to treat you with dignity and respect, but I expect the same thing from you. If you're not willing to do that, this conversation's over. If you're willing to treat each other in that manner, we can have a conversation, and 9 times out of 10, I'm going to fix your problem. And I think just that genuine shared respect for one another. I don't have to agree with everybody's views. I'm never going to agree with them. But but it's okay if we differ in opinions, but let's be able to have that conversation. And I think that's where we sort of fall short when people are like, well, I don't want to talk to him because he's a conservative Republican, or I don't want to talk to her because she's a liberal Democrat. It's like, we've all got something to learn from each other.
Absolutely. I'm sitting here. This is my little workspace, working from home. And I got this photo behind me. It's my great aunt. She lives in an assisted living facility in Richmond, Virginia now. She's in her 90s. And I've known her my entire life. And she's my grandfather's sister. And at some point, a year or two ago, I went to visit her. We were kind of going down for regular visits. And she said, go into that file cabinet over there. She knew exactly what she was doing. So I go into the file cabinet, and she's like, pull that folder out. So I pull out this folder, and it's a photo of Eleanor Roosevelt and women standing around Eleanor Roosevelt. And I said, was like, I think that looks like Eleanor Roosevelt. Is that Eleanor Roosevelt? And she's like, yeah, that's Eleanor Roosevelt. And I said, is that you, sis? And we call her sis. Yeah, that's me. So there's a photo of my great aunt with Eleanor Roosevelt. I think the photo was taken like 1953, something like that. I'd never seen that photo my whole life. And I said, sis, why isn't this up? I actually think that was like amazing. Like Eleanor Roosevelt is, especially for women in America, such a prominent figure for women's rights and just in general, like, she did a lot as a first, as a first lady and beyond. Definitely a notable person. And I said, sis, what? I couldn't believe that she had this hiding in a file cabinet, and I was like, why wasn't this photo up on your wall? And she said, I'm not going to put that Democrat up on my wall. Like we've had these tribal instincts for a long time. We've been dealing with this for a long time. And the thing is, like, sis is someone who's very fun to debate with. We've had our fair share of little conversations, and some of them, sometimes the conversations are tough, and the what we see on cable news, like it translates directly. I see it around me. But with someone like sis, like, we have so much in common, and I love her so much. And she was always a great cook. She, after she retired, she was a school teacher. She retired. She went into photography, and she did beautiful photography, and she was always very active. And there was just a lot to admire about her. And And yet that is just such a crazy thing. She wouldn't put Eleanor Roosevelt up on her wall because, just because she was a Democrat. And the point is, yes, we have, a lot that divides us, but we have so much more that brings us to get back together. And I think it's, we can't just set aside those really strong differences. They are real.
Yeah.
Like, I think in general, our values are the same. It's kind of about, how we apply those values. And so for me, I in my personal world, it's maybe trying to come at things in a different frame, and recognizing that we can have these conversations. You might not want to go at them, head on directly right away, but building up some like understanding and empathy and some common ground with the person, that's going to make the conversation go so much further. And the way that the world is now, we've gotten so far away from that.
Yeah.
The way that at the top level, the way that the Senate and the Congress works, like there's no camaraderie, across the aisle, where there used to be. At the end of the day, I hear stories about when, at the end of the day, they'd all gavel out and go sit and have cigars and drink whiskey together, not to create a stereotype or some false image, but that's the way it was described to me. And we don't have that now. And I think, and what that does is it creates an understanding of our own, our interpersonal connections and the humanity of the other person. The way things are now, it's so easy to just kind of like label someone and then turn around and walk away. But, that is hard to do, especially for me living in New York City. I quit and moved from the city. And I'm glad I did. I don't miss it. I mean, there are things that I miss about the city, but I've kind of been moving further to the west. I ended up in California. But you get out and you kind of realize that there's more to the world than just, what the latest is on Politico, and what is on the banner of CNN, and get out and spend time with people, regardless of politics. And the thing is, we need that to make the politics better.
Yeah.
We need that. I know this. You practice what you preach. You get out and mix with people. But we need more of you, and we need more role models, and we need. We need. Again, it goes to having being more mindful in general in your everyday activities, and being open.
Well, it's just, to me, grassroots engagement is like what I love to do. I love to do it in office. I love to do it out of office. But it's like, I did a podcast, Chris Cooper, Business Elevation show out of London recently. But he was talking about a lady that was a friend of his in the U.S. She was so disenchanted with the political landscape, in the media, wherever. So she took the time to drive cross country and just to meet Americans where they were. And she was like, it just opened up a whole new world to me, that it was not what I was seeing on TV. So I think we have to be mindful of doing that. But once you take that leap of faith, you're like, man, these people are cool.
Yeah. Yeah. There's some really cool people out here. And I did I've been doing like road trips and getting out, hike the Grand Canyon, and I grew up on the East Coast. And so exploring the West, like Utah and Idaho and Montana, getting out to these places I'd never been before, they are jaw-droppingly beautiful. Yeah. I like just stunning, like in the national parks in Utah. And now I'm in California, and I'm, the coastline is beautiful. That's no surprise to anyone really. And I'm learning to surf, but I like getting out and doing different things. It also, like, all of a sudden that noise that's coming at you, it means a little bit less. it's kind of starts to put things into perspective. Like you start to think about other things. And for me, it's also getting out of my head. It's getting outside. And yeah, striking up random conversations with people that, like that was kind of a cool person. I'll never see you again, but like it was kind of a really neat exchange.
Well, I'll tell you, as I say, I went through 5.5 weeks of chemotherapy and radiation, but my wife and I, chemo was 3 hours a day on Tuesdays every week, 3 to 4. But we met so many freaking cool people. My wife became like the den mother. She's bringing everybody snacks and everything. But they knew, being in Augusta, that I used to be mayor. Not one person did we ever speak about politics in general. And I do not know the political affiliation of one person I went through chemo with. But we had that shared experience to where we were lifting each other up. And, maybe I would not recommend everybody go through chemo. God forbid, I would not recommend that. But just having those conversations and meeting people where they are, it's fulfilling. It feels good.
It does. It does. Anytime you connect with another human being, it feels good. It feels much better than fighting with a human being. That's for sure. I love that. I love, you were able to take, kind of that, I'll just call it an insecure situation, anytime your health is at risk, that's the core of insecurity, I think.
Well, and I'll just share with you though, I'm blessed with a positive attitude, and I've felt, very at peace and very calm throughout this. But to be able to share that with other people, because cancer is a very scary thing. When I first found out about it, the first thing is, man, am I going to die? So it's almost you are confronting that. But I'm like, to be able to say to people, we're in this together. I'm on an IV sitting in a chair next to you, and you are too. But we're going to get through this together. That shared common human experience, that's something I think we can come together around. And I'm like, as far as cancer goes, I don't know anybody whose life has not been touched by it, by their own diagnosis, having a loved one deal with it, family, friends, whatever. It is non-discriminatory. So can we kind of pick things like that? Mental illness, substance abuse. There are so many shared experiences, communal experiences that we've had in our country and as a world. Let's focus on those a little bit more.
Right. And the thing is, you have a choice.
Yep.
What to focus on. And we're so often, the way that we grow up and we're socialized, we end up in these cycles, these mental, we have the same kind of reactions, and we react the same way to our reactions the same way, if that makes sense. Some things that we like, we're going to gravitate to more so, and things that we don't like, we're going to pull away from. And that's, that's not necessarily bad, but there are times when maybe it's okay to like stick with the thing that you don't want for a set, just so like sit with that discomfort for a little bit and know that it's not going to last forever.
Yeah.
Life is always changing. And so, but the way that our mental patterns are, we're going to say, oh, that's not for me, and I'm going to cut you off. And that's, cancel culture.
Oh yeah.
And there, again, there's some value in that, but it's going into making those decisions with awareness rather than just like having knee-jerk reactions. And that's something that we can all, so we all get stuck in these cycles. And so what happens is, they call it a cycle of suffering. So we kind of have like, you'll find yourself in the same situations over and over again. But if you can, like, you do have a choice on how to react to things. And you can say either like, that's not for me, and just kind of let it go. Or maybe it's just having, changing something inside of you. That's what I've had to learn over the last couple of years is, if there's something that I don't like, I might not be able to necessarily change it, but I can change how I think about that thing. And so I came out of 2020 when I resigned, like, I'm going to change TV news. I'm going to change the world. And, I'm not going to do that myself in a year. And I went through kind of a mental depression.
I'm sure.
After a year and not able to do what I thought I was going to be able to do. And now I'm like, it's going to take some time, and if that's okay. I'm going to do some things for myself. I'm kind of, splitting my time between these different things that I'm working on. And I'm taking a longer view on, making these other changes. I'm not giving up on it. But it's I had to go inside and kind of do a lot, some work on myself. And that's one of the things that I came out of it with was it's okay. The timeline is going to, it's going to take longer, but I'm still on that path. I'm still working on that. So.
Well, and I'll tell you, Ariana, I mean, we're getting towards the end, but I believe we've talked about there are 500 bridging organizations in the U.S., Pray for Angels, all these starts with us, obviously. So I see a bright future because I see the success of all these cool, really intelligent people from all walks of life reflecting and want to change things. Is it going to take time? Yeah, but I'm like, if nobody starts it, it's not going to change. So you are part of that process. I know it's bad to be tribal, but I think you're one of my tribe as well. So thank you.
Well, I love that because yes. But I think it's a good tribe. It's a good, open-minded, curious tribe. And that
absolutely.
And that's important. And that's
beautiful. And it's fun. It's fun. Yeah. I'm like, I want my tribe to party and enjoy each other's company.
Well, and we are the same tribe, not because of politics necessarily, but because of this open, positive attitude. And that is contagious. Just like negativity is contagious.
Oh, yeah.
The positivity is also just as contagious. And so it's I love having discussions with you, and I always feel better coming out of it. And we just need more of this, I think. I don't want to sound preachy, but
no,
I love it. I think everybody needs more of this.
I agree. And so I would love to be a guest on your podcast too. Wonderful. But as we get towards the end of this beautiful dialogue that we've been blessed to have this morning, today, so where can people find you?
Well, I'm on Twitter at Ariana Pekary, and I have a website, arianapekary.net. The website, the podcast I'm producing is just still in production phase, where I'm kind of pre-producing these episodes before I launch them. The podcast is called Our World Inside Out. I'll be, certainly will be posting that and new episodes on my website and Twitter, kind of all those, the normal places. So,
okay. And my last question for you, other than I can't even believe we didn't get into you being a yoga instructor, but we'll save that for the next conversation. But on a daily basis, what puts a smile on your face and brings joy to your heart?
These days, surfing, learning to surf. It's so hard, but any little bit of progress that I make. And I will say we actually did cover quite a bit of yoga in this podcast because it's really more about the inner tradition of yoga that is really very powerful. What we think of yoga as the physical practice.
Yeah.
Is just a tiny, tiny little drop. It's really the inner lessons that I've benefited from are what is much more powerful. And so I guess I would probably have to say yoga is something that makes me smile. I practice every day. And that makes me happy. But there are similarities, to being out on the water, learning to surf, the challenges that you face, and learning to go with the flow.
And I need to learn to surf. I tried it once in Australia. My board hit me in the back of the head. I don't know how that happened. And I got into yoga a number of years ago at our MCA here, family Y. I was the only dude in the class, and I was the youngest person by like 30 years. And those ladies could tie themselves into pretzels and make me look like an idiot. But I need to get back into yoga too.
Well, yes. And I always tell students, do what you can, nothing more, nothing less. And don't try to do something that you can't do yet. I was in a class, I have to tell this story because it makes me laugh every time. I was trying to do, some people call it dancer pose, but in the class I was in, they call it standing bow. So you're balanced on one leg and you have the other leg back behind you, and you're trying to extend it up behind you, and your arm is out in front, and it's pretty fairly advanced posture. But there's a woman in this class who I would constantly try to kind of not competing with her, but I would compare myself to her, and it would I was never successful. But that's several months went by, and I realized that person was Michelle Kwan, who she was an Olympic figure skater, and I'm like, I was gonna hurt myself trying to do what she can do, and that was a lesson that I learned. Do what you can, nothing more, nothing less. We all still have a different starting point, and I can do things now that I couldn't do 10 years ago. It takes a long time. So there's some postures I worked on for years before I was able to get it. So but every little bit, if you give 100% properly with the right alignment and everything, then you're getting 100% of the benefits. So
and don't do yoga with Michelle Kwan.
Just don't compare yourself to her. Yeah. So,
well, Ariana, thank you for being an amazing guest. This has just been a pleasure, and let's continue the dialogue.
For sure, we will. And thank you for having me. I love having this discussion, and it's heartening, and I think it's smart.
Well, good deal. Well, that's all the time we got. So dropping the mic, and we are out.
Hey guys, thanks for listening to or watching the Changemaker podcast today. Greatly appreciate it. If you're listening and you want to see the video, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel at Deke Copenhaver. That's pretty easy to remember, I would think. But really, we also want to remind you to like, subscribe, rate across all platforms, download. And if you're looking for a coach, a speaker, or anything, you know where to find me. Just email me at dekecopenhaver.com. And thanks so much for listening.